England, June 1944. The morning mist still lingers over the airfield when the ground crew hears a sound they've never encountered before. A deeper, meaner roar than any Thunderbolt should produce. A P-47 D-28 taxis out from dispersal, the sun glinting off its matte olive-drab paint. On its nose, hand-painted in white, a single word: Betty Lou. Behind the stick sits Lieutenant Bill Dunham of the 56th Fighter Group, Zemp's Wolfpack. Beside the runway, pilots pause mid-cigarette. They've all seen Betty Lou before, but not like this. There's a growl under her cowling, a vibration in the ground that rattles coffee cups in the ready room. The control tower calls. Thunderbolt 71 cleared for takeoff. Dunham pushes the throttle forward. The massive propeller spins faster, too fast. The blade pitch shimmers like a mirror. Mechanics exchange wary glances. One mutters, "That can't be regulation." Then Betty Lou launches. The jug surges down the runway, tail lifting within seconds, wheels barely touching the strip before the midpoint marker. The sound isn't the familiar throaty hum of a Pratt & Whitney R2800. It's a scream, raw, metallic, furious. Airspeed climbs 100, 160, 210. The tower operator struggles to keep his binoculars steady. By the time she passes the far hedge, the Thunderbolt is already climbing at an impossible angle, nearly vertical. Exhaust flames lick her belly like a dragon's breath. "Jesus Christ," someone whispers. "That's a jug." In 30 seconds, she's gone. A speck above the clouds punching through where no P-47 has ever climbed that fast before. The sound of her prop wash ripples across the airfield like thunder rolling backward. The ground crew stares in disbelief. Then one of them grins, rubbing oil from his hands. "That's Red's bird," he says. He finally did it. In the corner of the hangar, Sergeant Frank "Red" Halverson watches silently, a wrench still in his fist. He's the man who tuned that monster. Not an engineer, not an officer, just a farm kid from Iowa who believes manuals were written by cowards. He's been warned before. "Too much torque," they said. "You'll snap the drive shaft," they said. But Red never trusted limits drawn on paper. As Betty Lou vanishes into the high blue sky, he mutters under his breath, "Engines want to live. You just have to let them breathe." The other mechanics laugh nervously because everyone knows, or thinks they know, what Red did. He's been tinkering all week, testing airflow tolerances, as he calls it. Command calls it reckless. He calls it science with dirt under its nails. When Dunham lands 20 minutes later, his face is pale, eyes wide. He kills the engine, slides back the canopy, and shouts down to the crew, "She hit 40,000 climbing." A silence falls. That's faster than a Mustang, faster than the Mi-109G, faster than anything with a propeller in Europe. Red just spits into the grass and grins. Guess the book was wrong again. From that moment, the 56th Fighter Group would never look at their jugs the same way. Somewhere in those engine guts, a forbidden tweak had turned a steel brute into a rocket with wings. And the secret, the one that made America's heaviest fighter the fastest, was hidden behind one mechanic's dirty hands and one defiant idea. If the rules slow you down, throw the rules away. For most of the war, the P-47 Thunderbolt carried a reputation like a curse. It was massive, the heaviest single-engine fighter in the world. And in the words of one British pilot, it flew like a brick tied to a hurricane. Luftwaffe aces mocked it openly over the radio. They called it Deer Milch Konenjäger, the milk can fighter. Too fat, too slow, too clumsy to tangle with the sleek German Messers or Wolfs. Even among American pilots, the myth stuck. The Thunderbolt was beloved for its armor, not its agility. It could take punishment, sure, but no one expected it to win a drag race. And that's how the manuals were written. Republic Aviation, under designer Alexander Kartveli, had built the P-47 to survive flak and deliver bombs, not to dogfight. It carried the largest piston engine ever mounted on a fighter, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower. But to keep it from ripping itself apart, the propeller's pitch governor was deliberately limited. Officially, that limit kept the aircraft within mechanical tolerance. In plain English, it stopped the pilots from breaking it. At 42 in of manifold pressure, the governor automatically eased off the prop blades, reducing their bite into the air. It was a built-in safety leash, the kind engineers loved and mechanics hated. Every U.S. maintenance manual printed the same warning in bold red. Don't adjust governor limiter. Damage and loss of life may result. It was sacred, untouchable. The prop governor was set at the factory and sealed with a red wax stamp. Breaking that seal meant a court-martial. But in war, safety is a luxury. Frontline pilots didn't care about engineering tolerances. They cared about the Mi-109 that could climb 2,000 at-EFT faster, or the FW-90 that could roll tighter and dive harder. Every second of acceleration meant the difference between life and smoke. They cursed the Jug's bulk, its drag, its slow climb. "It's a tank with wings," one frustrated pilot wrote home. "If I ever catch a 1-90, it'll be because he ran out of fuel." The truth was that the P-47's engine had far more to give. The R2800 could handle enormous stress. Its metallurgy, its cooling system, its supercharger were designed for limits no pilot could ever reach. But the engineers didn't trust pilots to know when to stop, so they locked the throttle behind a glass wall of caution. To the brass, it was protection. To the mechanics, it was betrayal. That's where Frank "Red" Halverson came in. He was the kind of man who believed every machine had a soul, and that the soul suffocated under bureaucracy. "They treat it like a museum piece," he told his crew. "I treat it like a horse that wants to run." And to him, the P-47 was no fat milk jug. It was a caged beast held back by ink and fear. When Dunham's Betty Lou broke speed records that summer morning, it shattered more than just air resistance. It broke the myth of the lumbering jug. The truth had been there all along, hidden behind a red seal on a metal plate, and a mechanic crazy enough to break it. The jug wasn't slow. It was strangled. And one man, armed with a screwdriver and a stubborn streak, was about to set it free. Frank "Red" Halverson didn't look like the kind of man who'd change aviation history. He was 26, tall, with freckled skin burnt by Iowa sun, and hair so red it glowed under the hangar lamps. His uniform was permanently stained with oil. His toolbox was a mess of wrenches, bent screwdrivers, and coffee-stained notes scrolled on the backs of ration labels. Before the war, Red was just a farmhand. His father fixed tractors. His mother drove one. He learned torque by feel, not by gauge, and timing by the rhythm of an engine knocking under load. He could fix anything that burned fuel, even when he didn't have the right parts, especially when he didn't have the right parts. When he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1941, his mechanical aptitude test was nearly perfect. But during basic training, he got in trouble for what the officer called overconfidence in mechanical judgment. Translation: he didn't follow the manual. He'd look at an engine diagram, shake his head, and mutter, "That's not how she wants to run." That attitude didn't fit well in a military that worshipped procedure. His instructors wrote in his record, "Skilled but undisciplined requires supervision, tends toward improvisation." Improvisation, that was Red's religion. He was shipped to England in 1943, assigned to the 56th Fighter Group under the command of Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zeed, the legendary leader of the Wolf Pack. ZMK didn't care for bureaucracy either. He valued results over reports, and his pilots quickly became known for bending rules as far as they would go. It was a perfect match. When Red first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt, he didn't see a slow brute. He saw potential, a machine built like a locomotive that no one had learned to drive right. "You give me 1 week with her," he told another mechanic, and I'll make her outrun a Mustang." The other man laughed. "You'll make her explode." But Red wasn't guessing. He'd spent nights studying the Pratt and Whitney R-2800 like scripture, memorizing pressure ratios, fuel flow charts, heat tolerances. He knew that the facto safe limit wasn't the engine's true limit. He once explained it to his crew like this: they build her to fight, then they cage her in paperwork. You just got to know which chains to cut. He cut them slowly, little by little. It started small, adjusting spark advance by half a degree, bypassing an air filter, swapping out magnetos for ones from a P-61 point. Each tweak shaved seconds off takeoff time and added feet to climb rate. But the big change came when he started looking at the propeller governor. The Hamilton Standard Hydroatic, a marvel of 1940s engineering, was what kept the prop blades from twisting too far. The manual said never to alter its factory seal. Red stared at that red wax one night after the hangar cleared. He turned a wrench in his hand, listening to the P-47 cooling beside him. The metal popped. The smell of hot oil filled the air. He whispered, "You can handle more, can't you?" That's when he decided. He broke the seal. He adjusted the pitch stop setting by a fraction, just half a turn on a hidden screw. To anyone else, it looked untouched. To Red, it was liberation. That tiny change would let the propeller bite the air harder, translating horsepower directly into thrust. It was the kind of modification no engineer would ever authorize, and no mechanic was supposed to survive trying. But Red wasn't an engineer. He was a cowboy with a wrench. And soon, everyone in the 56th Fighter Group would learn that one man's defiance could make an entire squadron climb faster, fly higher, and redefine the laws of war in the sky. War, in the end, is arithmetic. Every fighter plane in Europe was built around numbers: thrust, drag, altitude, horsepower, and the P-47's math didn't look good on paper. She weighed 10,500 of empty and nearly 17,000 loaded. Her rivals, the Bf 1009 Gand FW19A, were nearly half that. The German planes climbed faster, turned tighter, and burned less fuel. The Luftwaffe's doctrine was built on energy fighting, altitude, and acceleration. In those metrics, the Thunderbolt was always one step behind. On factory settings, the Jug's climb rate hovered around 2,700 ft per minute. The FW19A could pull 3,400. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, the Luftwaffe's workhorse, could surge past 3,600. Worse yet, the U.S. maintenance manuals handcuffed the plane's power output. The R-2800 engine could deliver over 2,400 horsepower in bursts, but the prop governor, that delicate piece of mechanical law, kept the output far below its real ceiling. To protect the gearbox, the Hamilton Standard propeller's pitch limiter kept the blades from biting too deep into the air. That meant less resistance, yes, but also less acceleration. The result? A fraction of the engine's torque went to waste every second. Pilots called it the Thunderbolt's choke. "Feels like she wants to go," one wrote in his diary. But someone's holding her back by the tail. In the world of propeller physics, everything comes down to balance. The dance between angle of attack and engine torque. Too shallow and you lose thrust. Too steep and you risk detonation or catastrophic shear. Factory engineers had set the pitch limiter conservatively, a universal safe zone for all conditions, all fuels, all climates. It worked perfectly in theory, but in practice it punished the daring and rewarded the cautious. Red Halverson wasn't cautious. He saw the data and it offended him. Every wasted RPM was a sin. Every inch of throttle held back was a betrayal of potential. He once laid it out to his crew chief using the back of a coffee tin. "Look here, you've got 2,000 horses in that engine, but only 1,700 pulling the plane. The restair running in circles, locked behind the prop pitch. You want to win this war? Let those bastards run." He was right. A field report from the 56th Fighter Group's maintenance logs listed an average climb time to 20,000 meter of 7.5 im driven fin po trainets. After Red's adjustment, though no one dared document it, that number dropped to 6.1, a difference of 84 seconds. In a dogfight, that was eternity. But Red didn't just outthink the engineers. He understood why they'd held back. Prop governors failed catastrophically if misset. One over-torque at takeoff, and you could shatter the reduction gears, seize the prop shaft, and turn a $50,000 fighter into a flaming wheel of death. Republic Aviation's engineers weren't fools. They built the limiter because they didn't trust adrenaline. But Red didn't trust fear. He knew the P-47's R-2800 wasn't like other engines. Its crankshaft was milled from a single steel billet. Its bearings could tolerate shock loads twice the rate output. The engine could take abuse that would have ripped a Merlin or a Daimler-Benz apart. To him, the limiter wasn't safety. It was a leash. And when the Luftwaffe held altitude superiority in 1943, it wasn't because their pilots were better. It was because the Americans had built their planes too politely. As Red put it, staring at a German FW-190 wreck being hauled into base. They build theirs to break rules. We build ours to follow them. That's backwards. The math of drag wasn't just about airflow. It was about philosophy. Every revolution in that massive propeller was an argument between caution and chaos, order and instinct. And Red Halverson was about to prove once and for all that sometimes the shortest distance between life and death is a single forbidden turn of a screw. RAF Boxed Airfield, Essex, late June 1944. The sky was clear, the morning air sharp with the smell of high-octane fuel andu on aluminum. Sergeant Frank Red Halverson stood by Betty Lau, sleeves rolled, cigarette in his mouth, and a guilty grin forming beneath it. He'd done it. The seal was broken. In the quiet hours before dawn, he had slipped into the hangar alone, flashlight between his teeth, tools laid out like a surgeon preparing for an illegal operation. One by one, he disassembled the Hamilton Standard Governor cap, there'd wax flake by flake, revealing the tiny brass limiter screw that decided how much air the P-47's prop could bite. He stared at it for a long time. A single screw, a single rule, a single career. Then he turned it 1/2 rotation clockwise. That was all. One forbidden gesture that changed the destiny of a 10,000-loop war machine. Now it was time to see if he'd just made history or a crater. "Red, you sure this thing won't blow?" asked Corporal Jennings, his assistant. Red spat the cigarette, wiped his hands. Only one way to find out. Lieutenant Bill Dunham, the squadron's favorite hotshot, swaggered toward them in his flight jacket, chewing gum like he owned the sky. "You better not have turned my plane into a bomb, Red." Red smirked. "If I did, at least you'll get there fast." Minutes later, Betty Lou was lined up on the runway. Her engine growled as Dunham throttled forward. Red watched, hands on hips, pretending to be calm while every nerve in his body screamed, throttled past 40 in, 45, 50. Normally, the propeller governor would flatten out the pitch, easing the strain. But not this time. The blades twisted deeper into the wind, biting harder, pulling harder. The engine coughed once, then steadied. The prop tips going supersonic in a shriek like tearing metal. The jug surged forward. Dunham hit 120 knots before the halfway mark. The massive plane lifted clean off the grass, climbing like a bird that had remembered how to fly. At 3,000 ft, Dunham glanced at his gauges. Manifold pressure redlining at 54 in. RPM steady, oil temp normal. No smoke, no shudder, just power. Pure, raw, unstoppable power. He radioed down, voice crackling with disbelief. "Red, what the hell did you do to my girl?" Red's reply came lazy over the headset. "Just let her breathe, sir. Let her show you what she's made of." At 10,000 RFT, the airspeed climbed past 420 hour. Dunham throttled back, But the Jug didn't want to stop. He leveled out and punched the stopwatch. Time to 20,000 ft is 6.22 minutes. The record for a P-47D was 7.4. He switched to Channel 2 Tower. This is Thunderbolt 71. I think we broke something like the laws of physics. Down below, the entire maintenance crew had stopped working. Men shaded their eyes, watching Betty Lou climb until she vanished into the haze. Red just leaned on his toolbox, smiling to himself. "She's not just climbing," he muttered. "She's free." 20 minutes later, Dunham returned, the plane purring like a contented animal. He taxied in, popped the canopy, and stared down at Red. "You realize," Dunham said, pulling off his gloves, "if the brass finds out, you're court-martialed." Red grinned. "Only if they find out." That night, the test data spread like wildfire through the 56th Fighter Group, whispered among pilots, copied in log books, hidden from command. By morning, 3 more Jugs had their governors checked for calibration errors. By the end of the week, 10. Unofficially, they were calling it the Halverson tune. Officially, it didn't exist. But the next time, a Wolfpack pilot hit throttle over France and watched a Messerschmitt fade in his gun sight mirror. He'd think of that farm kid from Iowa, the one who broke the rules so his engines could finally breathe fire. And in that moment, a forbidden screw turned into the deadliest weapon in the sky. When word of Red Halverson's tune spread through the 56th Fighter Group, it sounded like a miracle wrapped in blasphemy. The Jug, that lumbering steel beast, was suddenly climbing like a Mustang and outrunning Luftwaffe interceptors at altitude. The brass demanded numbers. Red, as always, provided math. He started with the basics: torque, drag, and thrust. The holy trinity of flight. The P-47's propeller blades worked like wings that spin. The steeper the pitch angle, the more bite each blade takes from the air. More bite means more thrust, but it also means more resistance. In normal conditions, that resistance builds torque strain on the engine's reduction gears. That's why Hamilton Standard's engineers had locked the governor limit to prevent over-torque. But here was the hidden truth. The R-2800 wasn't a normal engine. Pratt & Whitney's metallurgy tests from 1942 had already proven the double wasp could handle up to 3,000 horsepower at 70 in of manifold pressure for short bursts before failure. The Jug's design, though, never used more than 2,300 republics. Engineers had left a 30% performance, cushion for reliability and fuel. Standardization, Red had simply erased the cushion by adjusting the governor limiter by half a turn, 2.8 of additional blade pitch. He allowed the prop to pull in thicker air at high throttle without automatically unloading. That meant more drag at the blade tip, but also more forward acceleration. The effect was immediate. Field testing showed a net gain of 250 horsepower in climb mode, translating to roughly an 8% improvement in rate of climb and a 6% boost in top-end speed. The math wasn't magic. It was mechanical common sense. Most pilots never reached the true limit of their engines because the aircraft protected them from their own throttle. Red had removed that protection, letting the R-2800 deliver everything it had. And yet, it didn't destroy the engine. That was the real miracle. You'd expect the cylinders to detonate, the bearings to seize, the oil tanks to spike. But none of it happened. Why? Because Red's gamble aligned perfectly with the physics of the Thunderbolt supercharger system. The P-47 had a 2-stage turbo supercharger that compressed air for high-altitude performance. At normal pitch settings, the turbo operated under partial load, wasting potential pressure. Red's governor tweak increased the prop load enough to force the turbo to spin closer to its ideal compression ratio. In other words, his forbidden adjustment balanced the entire system. The very tweak the engineers feared would destroy the engine actually made it run more efficiently. In the field reports that followed, pilots described the new throttle response as electric. The Jug no longer lagged on climb. It surged. Pilots could push the stick forward, and feel raw torque drag them upward, like gravity had reversed. But every improvement had a cost. Fuel burn rose by nearly 15%, meaning shorter range and stricter planning. Still, to men flying daily against Mess and Fowler wolves, that trade-off was worth every drop. The physics were simple. Drag is the enemy of speed, but only if the engine can't push back. Red's fix gave the P-47 the bite to overcome its own drag. When Republic's engineers later reviewed the mystery performance gains from field units, their internal memo admitted what Red already knew. There is unaccounted efficiency in field-modified propeller assemblies, likely related to governor calibration discrepancies. Results are anomalous, but reproducible. Anomalous but reproducible. That was their way of saying he was right. What Red Halverson did in a dirty hangar in Essex had outperformed thousands of hours of factory testing. He didn't invent a new system. He simply let the existing one breathe. It was the perfect rebellion. Elegant, invisible, undeniable. The engineers had built the Thunderbolt to endure. Red had taught it to fight back. July 1944. The sky over occupied France was the color of gunmetal. The kind of day where even the sunlight looked like it was bleeding. Lieutenant Bill Dunham's P-47, Betty Lau, cut across the clouds at 25,000 high Fonatine thief. The modified prop howling at full bite. Beneath him, columns of black smoke rose from the wreckage of a German supply train the wolf pack had just strafed into oblivion. His radio cracked with tension. Bandits 11 so high. Looks like a swarm of 109s. 4 Messerschmitts peeled out of the haze above Paris. Sleek, quick, and deadly. Their engines shrieked as they dove. For years, the 109 had owned the vertical. Its climb was legend, its acceleration lethal. In every manual, every tactical chart, the P-47 was told never to follow a 109 up. But Betty Lou wasn't a normal jug anymore. "Copy that," Dunham said, voice steady. "Let's see if the math's changed." He pulled the stick back hard, throttle full forward. The Hamilton Standard biting into the air like a buzzsaw. The jug's nose lifted, her wings groaning under G-load, but she didn't stall. She surged. Down below, Red Halverson stood on the flight line with his headset on, listening to the chatter over the open frequency. He grinned, recognizing that sound, the over-rev whine of a prop spinning beyond regulation. "He's doing it," Red said softly. "He's actually doing it." Back in the sky, the 109 pilots were confused. They'd seen Thunderbolts before. Easy prey in a climb, but this one wasn't falling away. It was gaining. Dunham's altimeter spun like a clock on fire. $26,000, 27,000, 17 29,000 had verdier fee. The Jumo engines on the German fighters began to sputter as they reached the thin air. Dunham kept climbing, his canopy frosted with vapor, his oxygen mask hissed. "Betty Lau, you're redlining!" the controller yelled from boxed. "So's my blood," Dunham snapped back. He leveled off just above the German formation, the impossible position. The predator had become the prey. In one motion, he rolled inverted, dove straight down, and fired. The 850 calibers tore through the sky, stitching one Messerschmitt in half. The second pilot tried to climb out of reach, but Betty Lou dropped faster than gravity. Engines screaming, props still biting. 2 bursts, 2 kills. The surviving Germans broke formation, scattering like ants. One dove toward cloud cover. Another tried to loop, and Dunham followed, impossibly tight for a plane that weighed as much as a bus. His tracers found their mark, and a third 109 exploded in a white flash over the Seine. When the air cleared, Dunham's voice came over the radio, calm and low. 3 confirmed, 1 probable. The old girl flies different today. At boxed, Red leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. "Different," he muttered. "She flies right." Later that day, Dunham's gun camera footage played in the ready room. Pilots crowded around the projector, jaws dropping as they watched the P-47 outturn the Luftwaffe's finest. Someone whispered, "That can't be stock, Jug." Red smirked from the back of the room. "It ain't stock," he said. "She's custom." The footage reached headquarters by nightfall. The report labeled it anomalous flight data. Colonel Zempe, the Wolfpack's commander, called Dunham in for questioning. "What did your crew do to that plane?" he asked. Dunham smiled. "Sir, I think my mechanic just rewrote the manual. For the next 2 weeks, the Wolfpack flew with a new unofficial motto painted in chalk above the maintenance bay. If it breathes, make it run. If it runs, make it roar." And roar they did. The Luftwaffe started calling the P-47s of Zempe's group the Silver Bulls. They'd appear from nowhere, dive, climb, and vanish again. Thunder made of aluminum and defiance, all because one red-haired farm kid had turned a forbidden screw and made the impossible climb real. By August 1944, whispers about the fast Jugs were spreading far beyond the 56th Fighter Group. Reports of Thunderbolts outclimbing February 190s reached Allied command, and the numbers didn't add up. The War Department's Engineering Division sent an inspection team to Boxt, led by Brigadier General Nathan Twining himself, a man who didn't believe in fairy tales, least of all mechanical ones. They arrived in polished jeeps, notebooks ready, wearing expressions that said, "We're here to catch someone lying." "Who's this Sergeant Halverson?" Twining asked as they stepped into the hangar. Red looked up from under a cowling, hands black with grease, cigarette clamped in his teeth. "That be me, sir," he said without looking up. Twining's aide frowned. "Sergeant, we're investigating reports of unauthorized modifications to propeller governor assemblies on combat aircraft." Red wiped his hands on a rag and grinned. "Must have been the goblins, sir. We just keep them running." The hangar was lined with Thunderbolts, their cowlings open like jaws, engines still hot from sortie rotation. The air smelled like oil, sweat, and ozone. Twining walked slowly past Betty Lou, tapping the propeller hub with his finger. "This one flew at 440 mph level at altitude," the general said flatly. "That's faster than factory specifications." "Would you care to explain that?" Red shrugged. Maybe she just wanted it more. The engineers scowled. They began measuring, inspecting, disassembling. Hours passed. They checked the turbocharger, the intercooler, the fuel lines. Everything matched standard issue. Finally, one officer called out, "Sir, we found it." There on the Hamilton Standard Governor, the red wax seal was missing. In its place was a faint wrench mark and a single screw head turned ever so slightly, maybe half a degree from center. "Who authorized this?" The officer barked. Red took a long drag of his cigarette. "Nobody," he said. "That's why it works." Twining didn't smile. "You realize, Sergeant, that's grounds for court-martial." "Yes, sir," Red said, still calm. "But so is losing pilots, because someone in a suit thinks an engine can't handle what it's built for." Twining's glare held for a long moment. Then he motioned for the engineers to reassemble the unit. "Test it," he said. They mounted the prop, fired up the R-2800, and throttled forward. The Thunderbolt's roar filled the hangar, shaking tools off benches. The prop blurred into a silver disk. The gauges climbed, RPM steady. Manifold pressure high but stable. No failure, no vibration, just raw power. The engineers exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a Hamilton Standard representative, muttered under his breath, "This shouldn't be possible." Twining raised an eyebrow. "And yet here we are." He turned to Red. "You're either the luckiest mechanic in the 8th Air Force or the craziest." Red flicked his cigarette butt into an oil pan. "Sir, I'm both. That's why it works." For a long moment, no one said anything. Then Twining gave a faint smirk. The kind of soldier hides when he knows he's been beaten by someone he should probably be saluting. "Make sure that screw stays where it is," he said finally. "And for God's sake, don't put it in writing." By the end of the month, A quiet directive came down from Republic Aviation to all maintenance units in the ETO. Reevaluate propeller governor calibration to ensure maximum field efficiency under combat conditions. Official translation, do what Halverson did, just don't call it that. Within weeks, factory technicians were retrofitting new P-47M models with modified prop governor tolerances straight from the production line. No mention of the sergeant from Iowa, no credit. Just a quiet revolution hidden in technical language. Red didn't care. He wasn't in it for medals. He just wanted his planes to live. That night, after the inspection team left, the Wolfpack pilots raised their coffee mugs in the mess. To Red, Dunham said, "Who broke the rules so we could break records?" Red raised a wrench instead of a cup. "To the book," he said, grinning. "May it stay wrong forever." Outside, the sound of another P-47 taking off shook the windows. A thunderclap born from one forbidden screw echoing across the English countryside. By the autumn of 1944, the results were undeniable. Every squadron that adopted the Halverson tune, whether officially or not, reported the same transformation. Faster climbs, tighter throttle response, smoother operation under pressure. What had begun as a single forbidden adjustment in a cold hangar had evolved into a quiet revolution across the entire 8th Air Force. The U.S. Army Air Forces didn't publish the change. Of course, official reports credited standard improvements to the Hamilton Standard Propeller system, but everyone in the field knew better. The men who flew the jugs whispered the truth. Somewhere out there, a red-headed farm kid fixed what the factory couldn't. In September, Republic Aviation's engineering bulletin formally integrated a new propeller control system on late-production P-47M models, identical in behavior to Red Halverson's field mod. The adjustment was rebranded as a high-altitude torque balance correction. The fine print mentioned enhanced governor tolerance for improved climb performance. Not a word about the man who made it happen. But for the pilots, the proof was written in the sky. The Thunderbolt, once mocked as slow and clumsy, was suddenly a killer. A squadron report from ZMA's Wolfpack recorded a 30% increase in confirmed kills and a dramatic reduction in combat losses. One Luftwaffe veteran would later recall, after mid-1944, the American jugs could climb with us and dive like gods. It wasn't just performance, it was morale. Pilots began to believe in their machines again. They trusted the jug not as a tank with wings, but as a thoroughbred waiting to be unleashed. And that was the real victory. Because Red's fix wasn't just about torque and pitch. It was about freedom. It embodied something the German engineers could never replicate. A culture where a sergeant could outthink a general, where intuition mattered more than permission, and where courage in a workshop could change the balance of air power. When Colonel Zamke finally learned the full story months later, he didn't reprimand Red. He called him into his tent, poured him a cup of coffee, and said, "You know, Sergeant, the engineers hate you." Red smiled. "They should. I keep proving they're human." Zama nodded. "Keep doing it. Just make sure the brass never finds out how much." Years later, a declassified memo from the Wright Field Test Center confirmed the field results. Engineers had independently tested Halverson's pitch settings under controlled conditions. The report read, "Enhanced blade angle tolerance offers measurable gains in altitude and acceleration. No structural damage observed. Field reports validated." In bureaucratic terms, that was as close as the military ever came to saying, "You were right." For Red, the recognition didn't matter. He wasn't a man who cared for headlines or medals. He was a man who believed engines had souls, and that rules were the cages people built around them. He once told a young mechanic, "Paper tells you what keeps it alive. Listening tells you what makes it sing." The P-47 sang louder because of him. By war's end, over 15,000 Thunderbolts had rolled out of American factories, each one carrying echoes of Red's defiance. A bit more bite, a bit more thunder. The Halverson fix never appeared in textbooks. It lived only in the stories of men who came home because one mechanic wasn't afraid to risk his job or his life for a little more speed. And that's the paradox of war's greatest innovations. The heroes aren't always the ones in the cockpit. Sometimes they're the ones in the shadows, sleeves rolled, wrench in hand, daring to turn one forbidden screw that the whole world said not to touch. The pilots got the glory. The planes got the fame. But the thunder belonged to Red. Years later, when the war ended and the skies of Europe were still again, Red Halverson returned home to Iowa. He traded his wrenches for plows, the roar of engines for the hum of tractors. The field stretched flat to the horizon. No bombers, no contrails, no echo of gunfire. Just wind moving through corn like the slow breath of peace. But every night, when the sun dipped low and the light hit his barn just right, he could still hear it. That sound, that deep metallic growl of the R-2800 coming alive. It was etched into his bones. In town, they called him Thunderbolt Red. Nobody knew exactly what he had done during the war, only that every pilot who visited the local airfield wanted to shake his hand. When they asked what it was like working on the P-47, he would just smile and say, "Like talking to a stubborn horse. Kick it right, and it'll carry you through hell." One spring afternoon, a young mechanic stopped by his shop, fresh from the Air Force, full of questions about torque, balance, and gear tolerances. Red listened, nodded, then wiped his hands and leaned against an old radial engine suspended from a chain hoist. "Kid," he said, "there's what the manual says, and there's what the metal tells you. The day you start listening to the metal, that's when you stop being a mechanic and start being a man who makes things live." The kid didn't understand then, but years later he would write about that moment, about the old man who taught him that courage wasn't just facing bullets, but defying convention. Red never wrote his story. He didn't need to. It lived in the machines that flew longer, climbed higher, and returned home because one sergeant trusted his instincts over the rulebook. In 1961, when the Air Force Museum unveiled its fully restored P-47D Thunderbolt, they discovered something etched beneath the governor housing, faint and almost invisible under a layer of paint. It wasn't a serial number, it was a name, F.N. Halverson. Don't tell the brass. The restoration team left it there because history doesn't belong only to generals and pilots. It belongs to the men with dirty hands and daring ideas, the ones who look at limits and quietly decide to ignore them. And every time a radial engine fires up and the air trembles with that familiar roar somewhere in the sound between pistons and prop, there's still a whisper from 1944, "Let her breathe." The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just win battles. It proved something greater, that freedom itself, when unchained from fear, can fly faster than any rule ever written. That was Red Halverson's legacy. Not medals, not rank, just a sound that will never die. The sound of thunder. The sound of thunder.